The autumn wind carried the scent of pine and dry earth as Jonah Caldwell's truck rumbled up the forgotten dirt road toward the inheritance he never wanted. 15 years since he'd set foot in Timber Creek, yet the familiar landscape stirred memories he'd spent a decade trying to bury. The property appeared as the road crested a small rise, a weathered bunkhouse standing solitary against the backdrop of mountains, its wooden frame defiant against time and neglect. Uncle Marcus's final bequest. The old man's lawyer had been specific when he'd called 3 weeks ago. The property came with conditions. No structural changes for 5 years. Never sell to Hardwick Mining Company. And most peculiarly, respect the local customs regarding the place. The truck's tires crunched on gravel as Jonah pulled to a stop 50 yards from the bunkhouse. His hand trembled slightly as he cut the engine. From fatigue, he told himself, not apprehension. The divorce papers finalized last month sat in a manila folder on the passenger seat. The foreclosure notice on his contracting business was crumpled somewhere in the glove compartment. At 42, Jonah Caldwell had become a living testament to squandered potential. The property stretched before him, 5 acres of scrubland backing up to forest, with the bunkhouse standing as its only structure. Built in the 1920s to house miners, it had been in the Caldwell family for 3 generations. Jonah remembered summer visits as a child, before Uncle Marcus's gradual withdrawal from society had made such gatherings uncomfortable. As he stepped from the truck, the silence struck him immediately. No birds called, no insects hummed. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath around this place. His boots raised small clouds of dust with each step toward the bunkhouse. On the weathered porch, 3 empty beer bottles stood in a neat row, not weathered or dusty, but recently placed. Someone had been here, making themselves comfortable on property that wasn't theirs. The key felt unnaturally cold in his palm, despite the afternoon warmth. It slid into the lock with surprising ease, as if the mechanism had been recently oiled. The door swung open with barely a whisper, not the protesting creak expected from a building supposedly abandoned for months since Marcus's death. Filtered sunlight spilled through grimy windows, illuminating dancing dust motes in the stagnant air. The interior smelled of wood smoke and something sharper beneath, a medicinal scent he couldn't immediately place. What struck Jonah most wasn't the mustiness or the shadows playing across worn floorboards, but the meticulous orderliness of it all. For a supposedly abandoned structure with a reputation for being haunted, someone had taken remarkable care with its upkeep. Fresh boot prints marked the dust near the entrance, too recent to belong to the lawyer who'd locked up after Marcus's funeral. Jonah followed their path across the main room to where they stopped at a wooden table centered beneath the largest window. His coffee mug, the one he'd absently left on the windowsill during his brief inspection yesterday, now sat squarely in the middle of the table. Someone had been inside since yesterday. Someone with a key, or someone who didn't need one. The bunkhouse consisted of 4 rooms, the main living area with its pot-bellied stove, a sparse kitchen with a hand pump at the sink, a bedroom with an iron-framed cot, and a storage room filled with tools and equipment. Everything covered in a fine layer of dust, yet nothing appeared neglected or decayed. The structure seemed frozen in time, as if Marcus had simply stepped out momentarily rather than died in the county hospital 6 months ago. A framed photograph hung beside the stone fireplace. Marcus as a young man standing beside a woman Jonah didn't recognize. She wore riding clothes and held the reins of a chestnut mare, her smile bright against sun-darkened skin. No inscription identified her, but the familiar ease between them suggested more than casual acquaintance. In the bedroom, a Bible sat on a small table beside the cot. Opening it, Jonah found an inscription in faded ink. To Catherine, may these words guide you through darkness. Love always, Marcus. Catherine, not a name Jonah recognized from family conversations. He tucked the Bible into his jacket pocket, somehow certain it didn't belong to his uncle. The floorboards creaked beneath his weight as he moved through the rooms, some sections feeling decidedly loose. Kneeling to examine one, Jonah noticed fresh scratch marks around the nail heads, splinters that hadn't darkened with age. Someone had been prying at these boards, and recently. The locals had rules about this place, he recalled from his conversation with the lawyer. Simple ones that had seemed like superstitious nonsense. Never stay after dark, never go inside alone, never dig near the foundation. Folk tales to scare children, he'd thought. Now, studying the deliberate placement of the coffee mug in the freshly disturbed floorboards, he wasn't so certain. A metallic tang hung in the air near the back corner of the main room. Kneeling, Jonah found newer floorboards installed there. The wood a slightly different shade, the craftsmanship hastier than the original construction. Whatever had been buried beneath this floor, someone had worked very hard to conceal it. The lawyer's words echoed in his mind. Marcus was very specific about who could inherit the property. Only you, Jonah. He was adamant it couldn't go to anyone else, especially not anyone connected to Hardwick mining. Said you'd understand when the time came. But Jonah didn't understand. 15 years ago, he'd left Timber Creek with a shattered career and wounded pride after his investigation into Hardwick Mining Company's business practices mysteriously fell apart. Evidence disappeared from locked cabinets. Witnesses recanted statements. The case collapsed so completely that Jonah's credibility as a deputy marshal followed suit. He'd never discussed the case with Uncle Marcus, never explained how a powerful man like Ryland Hardwick could seemingly bend an entire justice system to his will. Yet Marcus had left him this property with specific instructions not to sell to the Hardwicks, as if he'd known exactly what had driven Jonah away all those years ago. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling through cracks in the weather-beaten walls. Something metal rattled against the western side of the building. Investigating, Jonah found an old tin sign hanging by a single nail, swinging back and forth with each gust. Hardwick Mining Company, the faded letters proclaimed. The sign hadn't been there yesterday. Shadows lengthened across the floor as the sun dipped toward the horizon. If Jonah intended to honor the local superstitions, he had perhaps 20 minutes to finish his inspection and leave before nightfall. Yet something kept him rooted to the spot, staring at those newer floorboards, wondering what secrets lay beneath. The knife in his pocket made short work of prying up one loose board, then another. The smell intensified, sweet and sickly like metal and old preservatives. The space beneath the floor was shallow, no more than 18 inches deep, but what it contained made Jonah's breath catch. A wooden box roughly the size of a man's chest sat wrapped in oiled cloth that had kept it dry through the years. Lifting it required effort. Whatever was inside wasn't papers or fabric. Setting it on the table where his coffee mug had been, Jonah noticed fresh scratches on the box's metal latches, bright metal showing through tarnish. Someone else had opened this recently. Inside, 3 small leather pouches contained what appeared to be gold dust. Beneath them lay detailed maps showing property boundaries that didn't match current records, each marked with handwritten notations in faded ink. And at the bottom, a stack of letters written in a woman's careful hand, each dated from 20 years ago. The name at the bottom of the first letter made him pause. Your devoted sister, Catherine Hardwick. Hardwick, the name that had haunted Timber Creek for generations. The name that had destroyed Jonah's career when evidence mysteriously disappeared from locked cabinets. Ryland Hardwick owned the largest spread in the valley and controlled everything from water rights to the local judge's re-election campaign. But why would Ryland's sister be writing to Uncle Marcus? And why were these letters hidden under the floorboards like contraband? The sound of approaching horses broke his concentration. Through the window, Jonah saw 2 riders coming up the dirt road. One he recognized immediately as Ryland Hardwick himself, his silver hair gleaming in the dying sunlight. Beside him rode a younger man Jonah didn't know, broad-shouldered with a military bearing. They moved with purpose, like men who knew exactly where they were going and why. Jonah hastily replaced the box's contents and slid it back beneath the floorboards, fitting the loose planks back into place. They settled with practiced ease, as though someone had performed this hiding routine many times before. Ryland's voice carried on the evening air as they approached. Should have dealt with this years ago. Now we've got another Caldwell poking around. The tone was urgent, almost angry. These men weren't coming for a neighborly welcome. They were coming because someone had seen Jonah's truck and knew he was inside, doing exactly what they didn't want him to do. How long had they been watching? And what were they willing to do to keep him from discovering what else was buried beneath this place? Jonah straightened, brushing dust from his jeans as the footsteps reached the porch. No time to leave now. The confrontation he'd avoided for 15 years had finally caught up with him. Ryland Hardwick didn't knock. He stepped through the doorway like he owned the place, his Italian leather boots echoing against the floorboards that had just revealed their secrets. The younger man remained on the porch, framed in the doorway, watching with the practiced vigilance of someone accustomed to anticipating threats. Caldwell, Ryland's voice carried the weight of someone unused to being questioned. At 65, he remained imposing, tall and straight-backed, with a full head of silver hair and the ruddy complexion of someone who spent time outdoors. His eyes swept the room with practiced intensity, lingering momentarily on the slightly uneven floorboard Jonah hadn't quite fitted back properly. Heard you were spending time out here. Folks in town are concerned about you. Concerned about what? It's my property. Jonah kept his voice even, his stance relaxed despite the tension vibrating through him. It was the first time he'd been face-to-face with Ryland since the collapse of his investigation 15 years ago. That's what we need to discuss. Ryland moved toward the table, his gaze falling on the coffee mug. He picked it up, turned it over in his hands, then deliberately set it down in a different position. A clear message that he had been the one watching, knew exactly where everything belonged. Your uncle and I had an understanding about this place. He was going to sell it to me before he passed. The lie came smoothly, practiced. But Uncle Marcus had been clear in his letters that accompanied the deed. Never sell to the Hardwicks. Never let them search the property. Never trust them with the truth about what happened here. He didn't mention any agreement to me. Jonah watched as the man on the porch shifted position, the movement revealing the holstered sidearm beneath his jacket. In fact, his will specifically said I should be careful about who I trust in this valley. Ryland's jaw tightened, the only indication that Jonah's words had struck a nerve. Marcus was sick toward the end, saying strange things, making wild accusations about events that happened long before you were born. He moved closer, and Jonah caught a whiff of chemical preservatives on his clothes, the same sharp medicinal smell that had been concentrated near the loose floorboard. Ryland had been here recently, checking on his hidden cache. Some stories are better left buried, son. What stories would those be? The question hung between them like a challenge. For a moment, Ryland's careful composure cracked, his hand moving instinctively toward his hip before catching himself. Whatever stories he was talking about, they were dangerous enough to kill for. The kind that destroy innocent people. Ryland's gaze hardened. The kind that drag up old pain and ruin good families over things that can't be changed. He looked directly at the floorboard where the box was hidden, whom ground shouldn't be disturbed. Outside, a horse stamped nervously and pulled against its reins. Animals sensed danger before people did, and something about this place, or these men, made every living thing uneasy. Wade Sutton, the younger man, introduced himself with cold formality. Head of security for Hardwick Mining. Security, a polite term for enforcer, the kind who followed orders without asking questions, especially when the paycheck was substantial. I'll think about your offer. Jonah spoke to Ryland, though he kept Wade in his peripheral vision. But I'm not ready to sell just yet. Ryland nodded slowly, but his eyes promised this conversation was far from over. As he turned to leave, he paused at the doorway and looked back. Word of advice, Caldwell. Don't go digging around here after dark. The ground can be unstable. Wouldn't want you to fall into something you can't climb out of. The threat hung in the air long after the sound of hoofbeats faded into the distance. Jonah waited until their dust trail disappeared over the hill before retrieving the box again. This time, he examined the contents more carefully. The letters were dated sequentially, spanning 6 months 20 years ago. The handwriting grew progressively more urgent, shakier toward the end, like someone writing in fear. He skimmed the first letter, finding it oddly impersonal. Discussions of weather and local events, nothing that warranted hiding under floorboards. But at the end of the third page, a sentence struck him. Remember our code, just as when we were children. A code. Jonah examined the letters again, this time looking beyond the mundane descriptions of daily life. Certain words were written with slightly more pressure, the ink minutely darker. Isolating these words created hidden messages throughout the correspondence. Ryland falsifying records. Mining claims stolen. 3 men disappeared last month. I found the ledger. Not safe to meet openly. The final letter, dated just days before Catherine Hardwick's apparent death, according to the newspaper clipping tucked between the pages, contained the most disturbing message. Evidence hidden in 4 locations. This is location 1. If you're reading this alone, I'm already dead. Night had fully descended now, moonlight casting long shadows through the windows. The first rule of local superstition broken: never stay after dark. A cold draft whispered through the bunkhouse, rustling the papers in Jonah's hands. The sound of movement outside snapped his attention back to the present. Something or someone was circling the building, footsteps crunching softly on gravel. Jonah quickly returned the box to its hiding place and moved silently to the window, staying in shadow as he peered out. A figure stood motionless at the edge of the property, barely visible in the moonlight. Not Ryland or Wade, but someone smaller, watching the bunkhouse with unnerving stillness. When Jonah blinked, the figure was gone, like a mirage dissolved by acknowledgement. Sleep would be impossible now. Jonah settled into a chair, positioned to watch both the door and windows, Marcus's old shotgun across his lap. The letters from Catherine Hardwick lay spread before him on the table, their hidden messages slowly revealing a conspiracy that spanned decades. Catherine hadn't been Ryland's sister at all. The code made that clear now. She had been his wife, a woman who discovered her husband's criminal empire and tried to gather evidence before he silenced her permanently. Dawn broke with the distant crow of a rooster. Jonah had dozed fitfully, jerking awake at every creak and whisper of the old building. The letters were carefully returned to their hiding place, but the knowledge they contained couldn't be so easily concealed. He needed information about Catherine Hardwick, about Uncle Marcus's connection to her, about what happened 20 years ago that still warranted threats and surveillance today. But most importantly, he needed allies. In a town controlled by Hardwick money, those would be scarce. The morning air carried the scent of rain that hadn't yet fallen. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon as Jonah made his way toward the property line, where he'd seen a small cabin yesterday. The mailbox read, A. Vance, in faded letters. Alma Vance was hanging laundry when Jonah approached, her weathered hands moving with practiced efficiency despite arthritic knuckles. She was older than he'd expected, mid-60s at least, with silver hair pulled into a practical bun and eyes that had seen more than their share of hardship. Those eyes narrowed when she spotted him, her movements becoming deliberately slower, more cautious. Mrs. Vance? I'm Jonah Caldwell, Marcus Caldwell's nephew. I inherited the bunkhouse property. Her hands went still, linens forgotten as she studied him. I know who you are. You were the deputy who tried to bring charges against Ryland years back. No admiration colored her tone, just statement of fact. Didn't work out so well for you. No, ma'am, it didn't. No point denying history everyone in town remembered. And now you're back, poking at old wounds. She glanced toward the main road, checking to ensure they weren't observed. I told Marcus that hiding it wouldn't be enough. Should have burned everything when Catherine died. The bluntness of her statement confirmed his midnight discovery. You knew her. Alma's shoulders sagged slightly, the weight of 2 decades of secrets suddenly visible in her posture. Catherine Hardwick was writing to your uncle about something important enough to hide under floorboards. Important enough to get her killed when Ryland discovered what she was doing. She glanced toward the main road again, then motioned him to follow her inside. Her cabin was sparsely furnished but meticulously clean, with dried herbs hanging from the rafters and a rifle prop beside the door. Not for show, judging by the well-oiled mechanism and worn stock. Alma poured water from a pitcher into a basin and washed her hands slowly, deliberately, as though trying to cleanse more than just dirt. Catherine wasn't Ryland's sister, she confirmed, echoing his own discovery. She was his wife, and she was the kindest woman this valley ever produced, which made what happened to her all the more shameful. She dried her hands on a rough towel, her movements sharp with suppressed anger. Your uncle was the only one who tried to help her when things went bad. What kind of help? Jonah withdrew one of the letters from his pocket, noting the shaky handwriting that suggested fear or urgency. These letters talk about gold, about maps, about meeting in secret. Marcus was helping her escape. Alma's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Catherine discovered something about Ryland's business dealings, something that could have destroyed him if it became known. She was gathering evidence, planning to take it to the territorial authorities. The gold dust in the pouches wasn't just hidden treasure then. It was evidence, proof of Ryland's crimes that Catherine had been collecting before she died. But how had she died? And why had she trusted Uncle Marcus with her secrets? She never made it to the authorities, Alma continued, confirming Jonah's growing suspicion. Found dead in a ravine 3 miles from here. Horse spooked, they said. Terrible accident. Her tone made it clear she believed nothing of the sort. But Catherine was the finest rider in the county. That horse wouldn't have thrown her unless something frightened it badly. Or someone frightened it deliberately. Outside, thunder rumbled closer. The storm that had threatened all night was finally arriving, dark clouds casting premature twilight over the valley. Ryland mourned publicly, Alma continued, played the grieving husband perfectly. But he made sure to search your uncle's property afterward, claiming he was looking for personal items Catherine might have left behind. Marcus wouldn't let him inside the bunkhouse. Jonah completed the thought, understanding now why the property had been both feared and preserved. It wasn't haunted by supernatural forces, but by secrets too dangerous to reveal and too important to destroy. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made both of them freeze. Alma moved to the window and cursed under her breath. Wade Sutton, been watching my place since yesterday, waiting to see if you'd come here asking questions. The rider wasn't trying to be subtle anymore. He sat his horse boldly in view of the window, making it clear that their movements were being monitored. Jonah felt the trap closing around him. Ryland knew about the letters, knew about Catherine's evidence, and was now making sure no one could piece together the truth about what had happened 20 years ago. There's more to find, Alma whispered urgently. Catherine didn't hide everything in one place. She was smarter than that. The letters mentioned 4 locations. The bunkhouse is just the first. If you're determined to see this through, you need to find the others before Ryland does. Where would she hide them? Places that mattered to her, places Ryland wouldn't think to look because he never bothered to know what was important to his wife. Bitterness edged her words. The creek where she used to sketch, the old schoolhouse where she taught children to read, the ridge where wild flowers grow that she loved to paint. The back door of Alma's cabin opened onto a narrow path that led through dense brush toward a creek. She had planned this escape route years ago, knowing that someday Ryland would come for anyone who knew too much about Catherine's death. Why are you helping me? Jonah asked as they slipped quietly through the undergrowth. You've kept these secrets for 20 years. Why risk everything now? Alma's eyes hardened with resolve. Because I'm tired of being afraid. Tired of watching Ryland destroy lives while the town pretends not to see. Catherine deserved justice then. She still deserves it now. They reached the creek where the rushing water would mask their conversation from anyone trying to eavesdrop. Alma continued her story in urgent whispers. Catherine found records hidden in Ryland's office, bills of sale that didn't match the gold he was shipping out, maps showing claims he didn't legally own. She realized he was stealing from smaller miners, buying their claims with worthless paper while the real gold went into his private accounts. She paused at a fallen log, listening for sounds of pursuit. Enough evidence to see him hanged for theft and fraud. But she died before she could use it. A heavy raindrop splashed against Jonah's cheek, followed quickly by another. The storm was breaking, providing cover but also complicating their escape. Mud would hold footprints, making their trail easier to follow. Your uncle thought it was an accident too until he found her horse. Alma's voice turned bitter. The animal wasn't just spooked. It was shot, small caliber in the flank, just enough to make it rear and throw her into the ravine. Marcus found the bullet wound 3 days after the funeral when he went to collect the horse from where it was grazing. The implications hit Jonah like a physical blow. Catherine hadn't died in an accident. She had been murdered, deliberately thrown from her horse to make it look like a riding mishap. And Marcus had known, had kept the evidence hidden for 20 years, waiting for someone brave enough or foolish enough to use it. Why didn't Marcus go to the authorities himself? Because Ryland owned half the county judges and all of the local ones. Catherine tried the legal way first, sent letters to officials in the capital. They died in suspicious accidents or suddenly changed their minds about investigating. Ryland's reach was long, his pockets deep. Marcus knew he'd never live to testify. The rain fell harder now, soaking through their clothes as they followed the creek toward a stand of cottonwoods, where Alma kept a small boat hidden under overhanging branches. As she untied the rope, her hands shook slightly. "There's something else, Jonah. Something I never told Marcus because I was afraid of what he'd do with the information." "What?" Catherine wasn't the only one asking questions about Ryland's mining operations. There were two other women, wives of miners who'd sold their claims. Both died in accidents within 6 months of each other. She pushed the boat into the water. "You're not dealing with a man who kills once and stops. You're dealing with someone who's made murder his solution to every problem." The sound of dogs barking in the distance made them both look back toward the cabin. Ryland wasn't just watching anymore. He was hunting. Jonah realized with growing horror that he had walked directly into a trap that had been set 20 years ago, baited with his uncle's death and his own inheritance. As they paddled across the creek toward the opposite bank, Alma grabbed his arm. "Whatever you do, don't go back to that bunkhouse alone. There's more buried under there than just Catherine's evidence, and Ryland will do anything to keep it hidden." The rain became a downpour, reducing visibility to mere yards. Through sheets of water, Jonah glimpsed movement on the bank they'd left. Wade Sutton and two other men with dogs straining at their leashes. The hounds had their scent despite the rain, leading their handlers toward the hidden boat launch. "We need to split up," Alma urged as they reached the far bank. "They'll expect us to stay together. I know these woods better than they do. I can lose them and circle back to my neighbor's place. You need to find the schoolhouse. Catherine's second hiding place is beneath the teacher's desk in the easternmost classroom. Look for a loose floorboard with a nail head that doesn't match the others." "What am I looking for?" "Catherine's diary. She recorded everything, names, dates, amounts. The diary is the key to understanding the maps you found in the bunkhouse." She handed him a small knife from her pocket. "Take this. The blade is steel, but the handle is hollow. Inside is a key that opens a strong box in the third location, the ridge. That's where Catherine hid the most damning evidence." Before Jonah could question her further, Alma slipped away into the underbrush, moving with surprising agility for her age. The rain swallowed her form within seconds, leaving him alone on the unfamiliar bank. The abandoned schoolhouse lay 2 miles east, according to Alma's hurried directions. With Wade and his men searching the immediate area, Jonah's best chance was to circle wide, using the storm as cover. The rain plastered his clothes to his skin, mud sucking at his boots with each step. But the same conditions would hamper his pursuers and confuse their dogs. Thunder crashed overhead as Jonah fought his way through dense undergrowth. Each flash of lightning revealed a landscape transformed into shadowy threats and illusory movements. The valley that had seemed so open and empty yesterday now felt like a closing fist, with Ryland Hardwick's influence extending to every corner. The schoolhouse appeared through the rain as a darker shadow against the gray sky, a single-story structure with broken windows and a partially collapsed roof. Time and neglect had reclaimed much of the building, yet it remained standing as a monument to a community that once valued education over mining profits. Approaching cautiously, Jonah circled the building twice before determining it was unoccupied. The easternmost classroom was little more than a shell, its walls water-stained and floor treacherous with rotted sections. The teacher's desk, however, remained remarkably intact, solid oak that had weathered 2 decades of abandonment with stubborn dignity. Kneeling beside it, Jonah examined the floorboards, finding the one with the mismatched nailhead exactly as Alma had described. It lifted easily, revealing a space beneath that contained a small leather-bound book wrapped in oilcloth. Catherine's diary, preserved against time and elements by her careful preparation. A quick glance at the first pages confirmed it contained exactly what Alma had promised: detailed records of Ryland's illegal activities, including names of officials he'd bribed and miners whose claims he'd stolen. But it was the final entry that caught Jonah's attention, dated the day before Catherine died. "I've transferred ownership of the White Pine claim to a trust that R cannot touch. The papers are filed with Judge Harmon in the Capitol, with copies in location 4. If anything happens to me, M knows who to contact. The trust's beneficiary will inherit everything R has stolen. May they use it to bring him to justice where I have failed." A trust. Catherine hadn't just gathered evidence. She'd created a legal mechanism to transfer ownership of stolen mining claims before Ryland could stop her. If those documents were valid, someone else legally owned the most profitable mine in Ryland's empire. No wonder he was desperate to find what Catherine had hidden. But who was the beneficiary, and what, or where, was location 4? The answers might be in the diary, but Jonah had no time to read further. A dog's bark, closer than expected, warned that Wade's men had picked up his trail despite the rain. Tucking the diary inside his jacket, Jonah moved toward the rear exit of the schoolhouse, only to freeze at the sound of footsteps on the wooden porch. Trapped between approaching dogs and men already entering the building, Jonah's options narrowed to a desperate gamble. The classroom had no rear exit, but its broken window offered access to the roof of a small attached shed. If he could reach it without being seen, he might be able to circle behind his pursuers. Lightning flashed, illuminating the classroom in harsh white light as Jonah eased himself through the window frame. Thunder followed immediately, masking the sound of his boots connecting with the shed roof. The ancient shingles, slick with rain, threatened to give way beneath his weight. Inside the schoolhouse, voices carried clearly despite the storm. "Check every room. Sutton says he has to be here somewhere." A man's voice, unfamiliar and impatient. "Ryland wants that diary more than he wants Caldwell, but he'll take both if we can deliver." "What's so important about some dead woman's scribblings?" A second voice, younger. "Don't ask questions you don't want answered, kid. Just find the damn book, and maybe we all live to spend our bonuses." Their footsteps separated as they began searching different rooms. Jonah lay flat against the shed roof, rain washing over him in sheets that offered concealment, but threatened hypothermia if he remained still too long. The diary pressed against his chest like physical guilt. Its secrets were already endangering lives 2 decades after Catherine's death. The truth whispered beneath the sound of rain and distant thunder. In Timber Creek, the past never truly died. It merely waited beneath loose floorboards for someone foolish enough to uncover it. And some truths, once unearthed, demanded justice, no matter how many years or bodies stood in the way. Word count 6,953. When the searchers moved to the farthest classrooms, Jonah slid from the shed roof to the ground, landing in mud that muffled his impact. The rain had diminished to a steady drizzle, offering less concealment but better visibility as he crept along the schoolhouse's northern wall. The voices inside grew more agitated with each empty room they cleared. "He's been here," one man called out. "The floorboard's up." Staying low, Jonah circled toward the tree line 50 yards away. Dense forest offered his best chance of escape, if he could reach it before Wade's men realized he'd already fled the building. Lightning flashed, momentarily turning the landscape stark white. In that instant, Jonah spotted a third man positioned at the forest edge, rifle raised and scanning the grounds. Changing direction immediately, Jonah angled away from both the schoolhouse and the waiting gunmen toward a ravine that cut across the property's eastern boundary. The rain-slick grass provided poor traction as he sprinted across the open ground, each step threatening to send him tumbling. A shout behind him confirmed he'd been spotted. The disciplined search collapsed into chaotic pursuit as multiple boots pounded across the muddy schoolyard. A rifle crack echoed across the clearing, the bullet striking mud 10 feet to Jonah's left. A warning shot, not meant to kill. Ryland wanted the diary intact, which meant taking Jonah alive. The ravine appeared suddenly beneath his feet, a 6-foot drop to a rock-strewn stream bed now transformed into a rushing torrent. No time to find an easier crossing. Jonah half slid, half fell down the embankment, landing hard enough to drive the breath from his lungs. The stream water, frigid and insistent, soaked him to mid-thigh as he fought to maintain footing on slippery rocks. The current pushed against his legs with surprising force. Each step upstream required full concentration to avoid being swept away. Behind him, voices argued about the best way down, buying precious seconds. One man attempted the same descent Jonah had managed, losing his footing and landing with a splash and curse that suggested injury. The ravine curved sharply after 50 yards, offering momentary concealment. Jonah used the opportunity to clamber up the less steep northern bank, pulling himself up by exposed tree roots in sheer determination. By the time he reached level ground, his pursuers had committed to searching downstream, their voices fading into the storm's constant drumming. Disoriented and chilled to the bone, Jonah needed shelter to regroup. The bunkhouse would be watched, and Alma's cabin was likely under surveillance as well. He needed somewhere Ryland's men wouldn't think to look, somewhere connected to Catherine but not obvious to those who hadn't known her personally. The ridge where wildflowers grow. Alma's words returned to him, the third location Catherine had used to hide her evidence. If he could find it, he might discover not only the strongbox she had mentioned, but possibly shelter from both storm and pursuers. According to the map fragment Jonah had memorized, the ridge lay northwest, perhaps 2 miles through dense forest. With Wade's men searching the area around the schoolhouse, it offered his best chance of escape, despite terrain that would be challenging even in good weather. Lightning continued to split the sky at irregular intervals as Jonah made his way through the forest, using each flash to orient himself toward the distant ridge. The rain had begun to ease, though water still dripped steadily from the canopy above. His clothes, sodden and heavy, chafed with each movement, and Catherine's diary inside his jacket had begun to dampen despite the oilcloth protection. An hour's hard travel brought him to the base of the ridge, a limestone formation that rose abruptly from the surrounding forest. In daylight, it might offer spectacular views. Tonight, it was merely a darker mass against the storm-filled sky, offering both potential shelter and numerous places for enemies to conceal themselves. Alma had mentioned wildflowers, a detail seemingly useless in darkness and rain. Yet as Jonah began his ascent up a narrow game trail, he recalled Catherine's final diary entry, the White Pine Claim. Not just any location on the ridge, but a specific spot marked by a distinctive tree. The trail grew steeper, forcing Jonah to use handholds on exposed roots and rock outcroppings. Each step required careful testing. A twisted ankle here would be more than inconvenient. It could prove fatal with Ryland's men still searching. Near the summit, the trail opened onto a small plateau sheltered by overhanging rock. There, silhouetted against the sky with each lightning flash, stood a solitary white pine, taller and older than any tree on the surrounding slopes. This had to be Catherine's landmark. Approaching the tree, Jonah examined its base for signs of disturbance or marking. The ground beneath it was rocky, making burial difficult but not impossible. A flat stone the size of a dinner plate caught his attention, positioned too symmetrically to be natural. Lifting it revealed a small cavity containing exactly what he'd hoped to find, a metal strongbox, weathered but intact. The key from Alma's knife handle fit perfectly into its rusted lock, though turning it required considerable force. The hinges protested as he raised the lid. Inside, protected by multiple layers of oilcloth in a sealed metal inner container, were documents that made the diary's significance pale in comparison. Legal transfers of mining claims, signed by Catherine Hardwick and witnessed by a territorial judge. Photographs of Ryland meeting with men in expensive suits, exchanging documents and money. A detailed confession from a miner named Thomas Blackwood, describing how Ryland had threatened his family to force him to sell a rich claim for a fraction of its worth. But most damning was a folded sheet containing the trust agreement Catherine had mentioned in her diary. The White Pine Mine, Ryland's most profitable operation, had been legally transferred to a trust shortly before Catherine's death. The beneficiary's name was listed clearly: Alma Catherine Vance. Alma wasn't just Catherine's friend. She was her sister, who had changed her name after Catherine's murder to remain close while gathering evidence. For 20 years, she had been the legal owner of a mine Ryland had operated as his own, building her case while waiting for the right moment to reclaim what was hers. Ryland hadn't just killed his wife to silence her. He had unknowingly been stealing from her sister for 2 decades, operating a mine he didn't legally own. The profits alone would amount to millions, the criminal penalties to multiple lifetimes in prison. If these documents were authenticated, Ryland Hardwick would lose everything. A branch snapped somewhere below the plateau, the sound carrying clearly in the diminishing rain. Jonah wasn't alone on the ridge. Carefully returning the documents to the strongbox, he searched for a defensible position among the rocks. The overhang offered some protection, but also limited escape routes if he were discovered. Footsteps approached slowly, deliberately, a single person picking their way carefully up the same trail Jonah had used. Not the rushed movement of Wade's search party, but the measured advance of someone who knew exactly where they were going. Jonah pressed himself against the rock wall, wishing for his service weapon rather than the small knife Alma had given him. The footsteps halted at the edge of the plateau, just beyond his line of sight. "Caldwell, it's Alma. Are you up here?" A woman's voice, barely above a whisper. Relief flooded through him, followed immediately by suspicion. How had she found him so easily? Had she escaped Wade's men, or was she leading them to him? "I'm here," he responded cautiously, remaining in shadow. "Lone?" For now. Alma stepped into view, soaked to the skin, but moving with purpose. "But we don't have much time. Wade's men found my boat. They know we crossed the creek, and they've called in reinforcements from town. Half the county's looking for you now." "Why risk coming here?" "Because this is where we agreed to meet if either of us found Catherine's evidence." She gestured to the strongbox at Jonah's feet. "I see you found it. Did you read the trust agreement? You're Catherine's sister." Not a question, but a confirmation. The legal owner of the White Pine Mine. Alma nodded, her expression a complex mixture of grief and vindication. Catherine created the trust 3 days before she died. Judge Harmon in the Capitol filed the paperwork immediately, then sent Catherine confirmation that same day. She hid her copy here where Ryland would never find it. Why wait 20 years to use it? Because a piece of paper means nothing without evidence of Ryland's crimes to accompany it. He would have claimed forgery, used his influence to have the trust invalidated. I needed proof beyond doubt. Proof that he killed Catherine, that he stole from others, that his entire empire is built on fraud and murder. The storm had passed, leaving behind a sky gradually clearing to reveal stars and a waning moon. The improved visibility was a double-edged sword, better for navigation but worse for concealment if they needed to move. "We should go," Alma urged, glancing anxiously toward the trail. "Wade has dogs. They'll pick up our scent once the rain stops completely." "Where?" "The bunkhouse will be watched. Your cabin, too." "The old mining office in town. Samuel Reed owes me a favor. He'll let us in the back way and give us access to his telegraph to contact the federal marshal. Once we send copies of these documents to the Capitol, it won't matter what Ryland does to us. The evidence will survive." Samuel Reed, the name was vaguely familiar to Jonah. The newspaper editor, if he recalled correctly. Not someone who had featured in Catherine's letters or diary. Can he be trusted? More than most in Timber Creek. He was engaged to Mary Baker before she died, asking questions about her husband's missing mining claim. He's been waiting for a chance at justice almost as long as I have. They descended the ridge carefully, the wet ground treacherous in the dim moonlight. Alma led them on a circuitous route that avoided open areas, sticking to the deepest shadows beneath trees and alongside rock formations. Her knowledge of the terrain was impressive, the kind that came from years of secret movement through territory controlled by enemies. "How did Marcus fit into all this?" Jonah asked during a brief rest. "Why did Catherine trust him with her evidence?" "They grew up together. Marcus taught Catherine to ride, to shoot, to stand up for herself. When she married Ryland, Marcus was the only one who saw through his charming facade. And when she discovered what Ryland was doing, Marcus was the first person she turned to for help." Alma's voice softened with old affection. "He loved her, I think. Not that either of them ever acted on it. But that kind of love, the kind that respects boundaries while offering unwavering support, that's rare. And it's why Marcus kept her secrets all these years, even when keeping them drove him from his own home." "The bunkhouse isn't really haunted, is it?" Alma's laugh was soft but genuine. "No, but Ryland's men made sure everyone thought it was. Strange noises at night, items moved when no one was around, footprints appearing in locked rooms, all designed to keep people away from the evidence Catherine had hidden. The haunting served Ryland's purposes and ours. As long as people feared the place, the evidence remained undisturbed. They continued through the forest, every sense alert for signs of pursuit. Twice they froze at distant sounds, men calling to each other, the bark of bees. But the searchers remained far enough away to avoid detection. The town appeared ahead, its scattered lights offering both promise of safety and threat of exposure. Unlike larger settlements, Timber Creek had no nighttime police presence, no impartial authority to appeal to if they were discovered. Here, Ryland's influence was absolute. His private security force, the only law that mattered after dark. The newspaper office sat on a side street, its windows dark except for a faint light visible through the back door's frosted glass. Alma approached cautiously, tapping a pattern that suggested a prearranged signal. After a moment, the door opened just wide enough to admit them before closing quickly. Samuel Reed was younger than Jonah had expected, perhaps 40, with prematurely gray hair and wire-rimmed spectacles that gave him a scholarly appearance at odds with his muscular build. His office reflected the same contradiction. Books and newspapers arranged with academic precision, while a shotgun leaned casually against his desk. "You found it." Reed's focus went immediately to the strong box in Jonah's hands. Not a question, but a statement of fact. After all these years. "Catherine's final insurance policy," Alma confirmed. "Everything we need to destroy Ryland is in that box and in Catherine's diary." Reed cleared space on his desk, carefully arranging 3 oil lamps to provide adequate light. As Jonah placed the strong box down and opened it, Reed's expression shifted from hope to something approaching reverence. "Mary always said Catherine was gathering evidence." His voice caught slightly on his dead fiancé's name. "I never knew how extensive it was until Marcus contacted me last year." This revelation made Jonah pause in the act of removing documents. "Marcus came to you? When?" "6 months before he died. Said he was dying and needed someone else to know where Catherine's evidence was hidden. He couldn't risk writing it down. Ryland occasionally searched his mail, but he gave me enough clues to help Alma if something happened to him." Reed adjusted his spectacles, a nervous gesture that spoke of suppressed emotion. "I've been waiting for you to find the first location. Once you did that, I knew it was finally time." The 3 of them spread the documents across Reed's desk, creating a damning mosaic of Ryland's crimes. The trust agreement establishing Alma's ownership of the White Pine Mine, photographic evidence of payoffs to territorial officials, witness statements from miners who had been threatened or defrauded, and most damning of all, Catherine's meticulous records of gold shipments that didn't match official manifests, proof of systematic theft on a massive scale. "We need to send copies to Judge Harmon immediately," Reed said, moving toward the telegraph machine in the corner. "Once these are filed in the Capitol, Ryland can't make them disappear even if he manages to destroy the originals." "Can you trust your telegraph operator?" Jonah asked. "In a town this size, he's likely on Ryland's payroll." Reed smiled grimly. "I am the telegraph operator. Had it installed last year at my own expense. Said it was for receiving news stories more quickly. Ryland never questioned it. He doesn't think anyone in town would dare move against him." As Reed began encoding the most critical documents for transmission, Alma suddenly tensed, moving to the window that overlooked the main street. "Riders coming, at least 6 of them, Wade's leading them." Jonah joined her at the window. Wade Sutton and 5 armed men were moving methodically down the street, checking each building. Their search pattern was disciplined and thorough. They weren't just hoping to get lucky. Someone had directed them here specifically. "We've been betrayed," Jonah realized. "Someone told them where to look." Reed's hands faltered on the telegraph key. "Impossible. No one knew you were coming here except—" A sharp crack interrupted him as the front door splintered under the impact of a boot or rifle butt. Heavy footsteps entered the newspaper office's front room. "Reed, we know they're in there. Send them out and you can walk away from this." Wade's voice carried clearly through the thin interior wall. Jonah met Alma's gaze, saw the same calculation in her eyes. They had the evidence but nowhere to run. The back door opened onto an alley with no exit except the main street where more of Wade's men would be waiting. Reed moved with surprising speed for a newspaper editor, pulling the shotgun from beside his desk and positioning himself between them and the connecting door. "The telegraph message is only half sent. I need 2 more minutes to transmit the trust agreement details." 2 minutes they didn't have. The connecting door shuddered as someone tested its strength from the other side. "Get that message sent," Jonah told Reed, taking Catherine's diary and the most critical photographs from the strongbox. "Alma and I will create a distraction. Meet us at the ridge if you make it out." Reed nodded grimly, returning to the telegraph key as Jonah led Alma toward the back door. Outside, the alley was momentarily clear. Wade had committed his men to the front assault, leaving their escape route unguarded. a tactical error that might save their lives. As they slipped into the shadows between buildings, the sound of splintering wood behind them confirmed Wade's men had breached the connecting door. A shotgun blast echoed through the night, Reed defending the telegraph long enough to complete his transmission. Jonah and Alma ran through Timber Creek's deserted streets, keeping to shadows and avoiding the main roads where Ryland's men would be searching. The town that had once been Jonah's home now felt like enemy territory, every darkened window potentially hiding watchers loyal to the man who controlled every aspect of local life. "Where are we going?" Alma gasped as they paused in the shelter of an abandoned livery stable. "My truck." Jonah had left it parked behind the general store yesterday, a lifetime ago it seemed now. "If they haven't found it yet, it's our best chance to reach the federal marshal's office in Carson City. That's 60 miles on mountain roads. They'll have roadblocks in place before we get halfway." "Then we don't take the roads." Jonah's years working construction had taught him the back ways through these mountains, service roads and fire breaks that didn't appear on regular maps. "There's a logging trail that connects to the old mining access road. It's rough going, but my truck can handle it." They moved cautiously toward the general store, freezing at the sound of horses nearby. Two of Wade's men passed at the cross street, scanning alleys and doorways. When they had gone, Jonah and Alma continued their careful approach. The truck sat undisturbed behind the store, partially hidden by stacked crates awaiting morning delivery. Jonah checked it quickly for sabotage. Cut brake lines or sugar in the gas tank would be entirely in character for Ryland's methods, but found nothing amiss. Either they hadn't located it yet, or they were waiting for him to lead them to Alma and the evidence. "Get in," he whispered, helping Alma into the passenger seat. "Stay low until we're out of town." The engine started on the first try, its rumble uncomfortably loud in the night silence. Jonah kept the headlights off as he navigated by moonlight through the back lots behind Main Street, emerging onto a service road that led toward the mountains east of town. They had gone perhaps half a mile when headlights appeared behind them, a vehicle moving at speed with no attempt at concealment. Wade had heard the truck and realized their escape plan. "Hold on." Jonah flipped on his own headlights and accelerated, the truck bouncing violently over the rutted dirt road. The pursuit vehicle gained steadily, newer and more powerful than Jonah's aging truck. Within minutes, it was close enough for Jonah to make out Wade behind the wheel, his face set in grim determination. The logging trail turnoff appeared ahead, barely visible in the darkness, a narrow track that climbed steeply into dense forest. Jonah took it without slowing, the truck protesting as its wheels struggled for purchase on the steep incline. Behind them, Wade's vehicle hesitated momentarily before following. "He doesn't know these mountains," Alma observed, gripping the dashboard as they bounced over exposed roots and rocks. "Not like you do." "Let's hope not." Jonah concentrated on the treacherous trail, using every bit of his off-road experience to maintain speed without losing control. The trail narrowed further, branches scraping against the truck's sides like desperate hands trying to halt their escape. Wade fell back slightly, his headlights still visible but no longer filling Jonah's rearview mirror with blinding intensity. The gap widened as the trail grew more technical, requiring knowledge that couldn't be replaced with raw horsepower. They crested a ridge, the trail briefly leveling before beginning a descent toward the valley that contained the old mining access road. If they could reach it, they would have a relatively straight shot to the county line and beyond Ryland's immediate influence. "We're going to make it," Alma breathed, hope entering her voice for the first time. The words had barely left her mouth when headlights appeared ahead of them, multiple vehicles blocking the junction where the logging trail met the mining road. Ryland had anticipated their route and positioned men to intercept them. Jonah braked hard, bringing the truck to a sliding stop 50 yards from the blockade. Behind them, Wade's headlights reappeared, closing the distance rapidly. They were trapped between two forces with no side trails to escape onto. "Now what?" Alarm edged Alma's question. Jonah studied their surroundings, searching for options. The forest was too dense on either side for the truck to navigate, and on foot they would be run down within minutes. Ahead, the blockade consisted of 3 vehicles positioned across the junction. Behind, Wade approached steadily, now joined by a second vehicle. A desperate plan formed. Not an escape, but perhaps a fighting chance. "Take Catherine's diary and the photographs," Jonah instructed Alma. "There's a hollow pine about 20 yards into the forest on the right. It's big enough to hide these inside. If we don't make it, At least the evidence might be found later. While Alma slipped into the darkness with the precious documents, Jonah rummaged beneath his seat for the flares from his emergency kit. Standard road flares, bright enough to temporarily blind someone looking directly at them, combustible enough to start a fire in dry conditions. Alma returned, breathless but determined. It's done. The tree is marked with 3 stones stacked at its base. Jonah handed her one of the flares. When I say now, light it and throw it as far as you can toward the trees on the left. Then get back in and hold on tight. He gunned the engine, the truck surging forward toward the blockade. In his rearview mirror, Wade's vehicle closed to within 20 yards, its headlights illuminating the truck's cabin with harsh clarity. Now, Jonah shouted when they were 30 yards from the blockade. Alma struck her flare and hurled it toward the forest. The sudden brilliant red light caused momentary confusion among the men ahead. Simultaneously, Jonah lit his own flare and tossed it directly at Wade's windshield through his open window. The distraction worked exactly as hoped. Wade swerved violently to avoid the burning projectile, losing control on the narrow trail and sliding into a drainage ditch. The blockade ahead broke formation as men scattered from what they feared might be an explosion or weapon. Jonah accelerated through the gap their confusion had created, the truck's tires spinning in mud before finding purchase. They hit the mining access road at speed, fishtailing briefly before Jonah regained control. Behind them, shouts and gunfire erupted as Wade's men realized their prey was escaping. They'll radio ahead, Alma warned. There will be more roadblocks. They have to catch us first. Jonah pushed the truck to its limits, the ancient engine protesting but holding as they raced along the relatively smooth mining road. For 20 minutes they drove without seeing pursuit, the road winding through valleys and across ridges toward the county line. Jonah began to hope they might actually escape, until they rounded a bend and found a fallen tree blocking the road completely. Trap, Jonah muttered, slowing but not stopping. No vehicles were visible, but the blockade was too perfectly positioned to be natural. Someone had cut the tree specifically to stop them. 50 yards from the fallen trunk, Jonah swung the truck hard right, leaving the road entirely and plunging down an embankment toward a shallow creek. The truck bounced violently as it dropped 4 feet to the creek bed, the impact jarring enough to crack the windshield. "What are you doing?" Alarm filled Alma's voice as water sprayed up around them. "Taking the only path they won't expect." Jonah kept the truck moving through the shallow water, following the creek downstream. It wasn't a road by any definition, but it was just passable enough for the truck's high clearance to navigate. Rifle fire erupted from the roadside above them, confirming Jonah's suspicion that the fallen tree had been an ambush. The shots went wide as the shooters struggled to track a target moving perpendicular to their position and partially concealed by the creek bank. For half a mile they followed the creek, the truck slipping and sliding on submerged rocks, its undercarriage scraping painfully on hidden obstacles. Then, where the creek bent sharply east, Jonah drove up the far bank and back into the forest, putting solid ground between them and their pursuers. "There's an old hunting cabin about 2 miles from here," Alma said, orientating herself as they emerged from the trees. "Used to belong to my father before Ryland forced him to sell. Most people have forgotten it exists. Will it be safe? Safer than trying to outrun them on roads they control." She pointed toward a ridge barely visible in the moonlight. "Head that way. There's a natural draw that will hide our approach." The truck struggled up the steep terrain, its engine overheating from the prolonged strain. Twice, Jonah had to stop and let it cool, precious minutes ticking by as they listened for pursuit. The night remained silent, except for the occasional distant engine. Search parties, but not yet converging on their location. The hunting cabin appeared as a darker shadow against the trees, a small structure built of logs and local stone, designed to blend with its surroundings. No road led to it, just a faint trail that wouldn't appear on any map Ryland's men might possess. "My father built this place with his own hands," Alma said, as they approached on foot, having hidden the truck in a dense thicket a quarter-mile back. "Ryland never knew it existed. When he forced the sale of our main property, this wasn't included in the deed because it was technically on unclaimed forest land." The cabin's interior was dusty but intact, a single room with a stone fireplace, rough-hewn furniture, and a bed built into one wall. Mouse droppings littered the floor, but the structure itself remained sound, the roof still keeping out the elements. "We can't risk a fire," Jonah noted, examining the fireplace. "The smoke would be visible for miles. There's a root cellar beneath the floor." Alma moved to a woven rug and pulled it aside, revealing a trapdoor. "If they somehow find this place, we can hide there. It extends under the cabin and has an exit that comes out in the ravine behind." The foresight of generations past, building escape routes into every structure, knowing that in remote country, help was never coming if trouble found you. Jonah wondered how many times such hidden passages had saved lives in this valley's violent history. As Alma lit a single lantern, keeping its flame low and the shutters mostly closed, Jonah spread Catherine's diary and the photographs on the rough wooden table. 20 years of secrets laid bare in the dim light, each page revealing another facet of Ryland's criminal empire. The diary's early entries painted a picture of a woman gradually discovering her husband's true nature. Catherine had married Ryland believing him to be a successful, legitimate businessman. Over time, she noticed discrepancies in his accounts, unexplained absences, and minors who disappeared after disputing their claim settlements. One entry from 18 years ago stood out. R brought Judge Carson to dinner again, the same judge who dismissed the Wilson family's complaint about their claim being undervalued. The same judge who ruled that the Blackwood mine belonged to R despite TB having clear deed. When I asked how they knew each other, R said they were old hunting partners. Later, I heard them discussing how to handle the Baker problem. Mary's husband has been asking too many questions. 2 weeks later, Tom Baker's body found in a mine shaft. Accident, they're calling it. Mary came to me crying, saying Tom had evidence R had forged documents. I must be more careful in my own searching. R watches me constantly now. The pattern repeated through the diary. Anyone who questioned Ryland's business practices met with accidents or disappeared. 3 territorial officials who had begun investigations suddenly dropped them, later appearing in photographs with Ryland. Their lifestyles inexplicably improved. A federal marshal who arrived to investigate a claim dispute left 2 days later, declaring everything in order. His name appeared in Catherine's accounting ledger, receiving monthly payments thereafter. "She documented everything," Alma said, her finger tracing her sister's handwriting. Names, dates, amounts, even where bodies were buried. She turned to a page near the diary's end. Here, the ravine where they disposed of 3 miners who refused to sell. The abandoned shaft where Tom Baker's real body is hidden, different from where they have found him. Catherine knew Ryland would eventually kill her too. That's why she created the trust and transferred the White Pine claim before confronting him. Did she confront him directly? Jonah studied a map Catherine had drawn showing the location of various hidden bodies. The day before she died, told him she knew everything and was taking evidence to the territorial capital. It was her final mistake, thinking he wouldn't act immediately. Alma's voice tightened with old grief. Ryland had her horse shot that same afternoon while she was riding to meet Marcus with the final documents. Made it look like the animal spooked and threw her into Blackwood Ravine. By the time Marcus found her, Ryland had already declared it a tragic accident and had the body prepared for burial. The diary's final entry, written the morning of Catherine's death, revealed her premonition. "If you're reading this, I'm already gone. R knows I've discovered the truth. I've transferred everything to Alma through Judge Harmon. The White Pine claim, R's most valuable holding, now legally belongs to my sister. The evidence is divided between 4 locations only Marcus knows. May it someday bring justice to those R has destroyed." A sharp crack outside the cabin froze them both. Jonah extinguished the lantern immediately, plunging the room into darkness broken only by faint moonlight through the single window. "Could be an animal," Alma whispered, though her tone suggested she didn't believe it. Jonah moved silently to the window, staying to one side as he peered out. Nothing moved in the moonlit clearing around the cabin, but that meant little. Anyone with tracking skills would approach from the shadowed forest, not across open ground. Another sound, the distinctive metallic click of a rifle being cocked. Definitely not an animal. "The cellar," Jonah breathed, gathering the diary and photographs from the table. "Now." They moved quietly to the trapdoor, Alma descending first while Jonah followed with the documents. They had just pulled the door closed above them When the cabin's front door splintered inward, the root cellar was pitch black and smelled of damp earth and decaying vegetation. A narrow tunnel extended from the main space, presumably leading to the exit Alma had mentioned. They crouched in silence as heavy boots moved across the floor above them. Clear. A man's voice, unfamiliar to Jonah. But someone's been here recently. The dust is disturbed. Check for hiding places. Wade Sutton's voice was unmistakable. These old cabins always have secret compartments. Jonah nudged Alma, guiding her toward the tunnel. They needed to move now, before the searchers found the trap door. The passageway was cramped, requiring them to crouch as they felt their way forward in absolute darkness. Roots dangled from the earthen ceiling, catching in their hair and brushing against their faces like skeletal fingers. Behind them, a shout indicated the trapdoor had been discovered. Flashlight beams penetrated the darkness of the root cellar, but the tunnel's first bend shielded them from direct illumination. "They're in the tunnel. Get around to the back exit." Wade's order was followed by the sound of multiple boots rushing from the cabin. Alma increased her pace, navigating the tunnel from memory. "It comes out behind a fallen log in the ravine. There's dense brush we can use for cover, but they'll be waiting for us to emerge." The tunnel began to slope upward, the air growing fresher. Ahead, Jonah could make out the faintest lightning in the darkness. The exit, illuminated by moonlight filtering through vegetation. They paused just short of the opening, listening. Voices murmured outside, at least two men positioning themselves to capture anyone emerging from the tunnel. "Is there another way out?" Jonah whispered. "No, but there's a ledge about 10 feet to the right of the exit. If we can reach it without being seen, we might be able to circle above them along the ravine wall." A desperate plan, but better than walking straight into an ambush. Jonah handed the diary and photographs to Alma. "I'll go first. When I create a distraction, head for the ledge and don't wait for me." Before she could protest, Jonah removed his jacket and crawled to the tunnel entrance. He remained just inside, studying what he could see of the terrain beyond. Two men stood about 15 feet from the exit, rifles ready, their attention focused on the opening. They hadn't considered that someone inside might be watching them. Jonah wadded his jacket into a ball, then threw it hard through the exit, away from the direction of the ledge Alma had described. The jacket landed with a satisfying thump in some bushes to the left of the opening. Both men spun toward the sound, one firing reflexively into the vegetation. Jonah used their momentary distraction to slip out of the tunnel, keeping low and moving quickly to the right along the ravine wall. He reached the ledge Alma had mentioned just as flashlight beams converged on his jacket. "It's a trick!" one man shouted, turning back toward the tunnel exit. His light caught Alma halfway to the ledge, illuminating her clearly against the ravine wall. Jonah acted without thinking. He launched himself from the ledge, colliding with the man and sending them both tumbling to the ravine floor. The impact drove the breath from his lungs, but adrenaline kept him moving. He wrested the flashlight from the stunned man's grasp and smashed it against a rock, plunging that section of the ravine into darkness. The second man fired blindly toward the commotion, the muzzle flash temporarily ruining his night vision. Alma used the opportunity to scramble up the ledge and disappear into the brush above. Jonah rolled away from the first man, who was now struggling to his feet and reaching for his dropped rifle. A desperate lunge allowed Jonah to grab the weapon first, though he had no intention of using it. Instead, he flung it as far as he could into the ravine before sprinting toward the dense vegetation where Alma had vanished. Bullets kicked up dirt at his heels as the second man fired again, this time with more deliberation. One round grazed Jonah's arm, the sudden burn barely registering through his surge of adrenaline. He reached the brush and dove into concealment just as more flashlights appeared at the ravine's edge above, reinforcements arriving to cut off their escape. Alma grabbed his arm, pulling him deeper into the thicket. They crawled through undergrowth so dense it would hide them from searchers mere feet away, emerging on the far side where the terrain dropped steeply toward a stream. Without speaking, they half ran, half slid down the slope, using trees and rocks to control their descent. Behind them, voices called to each other as the search expanded. Dog barked in the distance. Wade had brought trackers. Their head start would be measured in minutes, not hours. "Where now?" Jonah gasped when they reached the stream, the icy water numbing his feet as they waded across. "There's an old mine entrance a quarter mile upstream," Alma replied, her breath coming in short bursts. Part of the White Pine Network. I explored it years ago, mapping the tunnels in case I ever needed to use them. Won't they expect that? They must know the mines better than anyone. They know the main tunnels on their maps. They don't know the old workings that were abandoned decades ago. There's a collapse that appears to block the tunnel completely, but there's a narrow passage around it if you know where to look. They followed the stream, moving as quickly as possible while staying in the water to mask their scent from the dogs. Each sound from the forest made them freeze, expecting discovery, but the pursuers seemed to be searching methodically from the cabin outward. The mine entrance appeared as a black void in the hillside, partially concealed by fallen timbers and decades of vegetation growth. No modern mining equipment was visible. This was part of the original diggings, abandoned when newer, richer veins were discovered elsewhere. Be careful, Alma warned as they entered. The support timbers are rotted in places. Touch nothing unless I tell you it's safe. The darkness inside was absolute once they moved beyond the entrance. Jonah wished for the flashlight he'd destroyed, though its beam would have made them visible to pursuers. They advanced slowly, Alma leading by memory and touch, Jonah following with one hand on her shoulder. After perhaps 50 yards, the tunnel began to slope downward, the air growing noticeably cooler and damper. Water dripped somewhere ahead, the sound echoing oddly in the confined space. The collapse is just ahead, Alma whispered, her voice barely audible even in the silence. Stay close to the left wall. There's a gap about 2 feet wide where the ceiling didn't completely fall. Jonah's outstretched hand encountered rough stone, debris from a cave-in that filled most of the tunnel. Following Alma's instructions, he pressed against the left wall, feeling his way along until he found the narrow gap she had described. It would be a tight squeeze, requiring them to proceed on hands and knees. I'll go first, Alma said, already moving into the opening. The passage widens after about 10 feet, but it's unstable. Move carefully. Jonah waited until she had cleared the narrowest section before following, the rough stone scraping his shoulders as he crawled through. Loose material shifted ominously above him, small rocks pattering down onto his back. The entire collapse seemed to balance on the verge of further disintegration. He had nearly reached the wider section when a sound from behind froze him in place. Voices at the mine entrance. Wade's men had found their trail despite their precautions. They went in here. Get the lights. The voice echoed clearly through the tunnel. Jonah scrambled forward, emerging from the constriction just as flashlight beams penetrated the darkness behind him. Alma pulled him to his feet, leading him deeper into the mine workings beyond the collapse. They won't risk the collapsed section, she whispered, but they'll know where it comes out. We need to find another exit. The tunnel branched repeatedly as they moved deeper into the mountain, each fork presenting a choice with potentially fatal consequences if wrong. Alma navigated with surprising confidence, selecting paths based on subtle signs Jonah couldn't discern in the darkness. Perhaps air currents, perhaps the slope of the floor, perhaps simply memorized turns from her earlier explorations. After what seemed like hours but was probably less than 20 minutes, they reached a chamber where multiple tunnels converged. Here, Alma paused, clearly considering options. The main exit is southeast, but that's where they'll be waiting, she murmured. There's a vertical shaft in the northwest corner that connects to upper workings. If we can climb it, we might find an exit they don't know about. The shaft proved to be a square opening in the chamber's floor, roughly 4 feet on each side, extending upward into darkness. Ancient wooden ladder rungs were set into one wall, many visibly rotted or missing entirely. I'll test each rung before you follow, Jonah said, already moving to the ladder. If I fall, get to the main exit and take your chances there. The climb was nerve-wracking. Each rung had to be tested before it could bear his weight, and several broke away entirely, forcing him to stretch to reach the next solid one. Alma followed carefully in his path, the diary and photographs secured inside her jacket. 30 feet up, the shaft intersected with a horizontal tunnel, an upper level of the mine that might offer an alternative escape route. Jonah pulled himself onto the ledge, then helped Alma up beside him. This level was drier than the one below, the air less stale. A promising sign, it might be closer to the surface, possibly even having its own exit. Which way? Jonah asked, peering into darkness in both directions. Alma hesitated. I've never explored this level fully, but generally mine workings follow the ore veins, and the white pine vein surfaces about a quarter-mile north of here. North it was then. They moved more quickly now, finding the tunnel in better condition than those below. Periodic cross braces supported a ceiling that showed fewer signs of instability. After several minutes, Jonah detected a faint current of air, fresh air, carrying the scent of pine and night sky. "We're close to an exit," he whispered, hope rising for the first time since their flight began. The tunnel ended abruptly in a cave-in that appeared to completely block further progress. Jonah's spirits sank until he noticed that the fresh air current actually strengthened here. Looking up, he saw a gap between the collapsed material and the tunnel ceiling. Another crawl space, but one that might lead to freedom. "I'll go first this time," he told Alma. "Stay here until I see what's on the other side." The gap was even tighter than the one below, forcing Jonah to squirm on his belly through a space barely larger than his body. The air grew fresher as he progressed, and after about 15 feet, he felt a brush of cold night air on his face. The passage ended in a tangle of roots and earth, the remains of the original exit, now mostly reclaimed by nature. Jonah clawed at the material, widening the opening until he could see stars through the emerging gap. With a final push, he broke through into open air, finding himself on a steep, forested slope with the valley spread below. He reached back through the opening, helping Alma navigate the tight passage. When she emerged beside him, they took a moment to simply breathe the clean night air, a luxury that had seemed uncertain minutes before. "Where are we?" Jonah asked, getting his bearings in the unfamiliar terrain. Alma oriented herself using the stars and distant landmarks. Northern slope of Cooper's Ridge, about 4 miles from town, but in the opposite direction from where they'll be searching. "What now? They'll have roadblocks on every route to the county line." "We don't need to leave the county," Alma said, surprising him. "We need to get to a telephone. My cousin Martha lives about 2 miles from here. She has no love for Ryland. He forced her husband out of business 10 years ago. She'll help us contact Judge Harmon directly." They set off through the forest, keeping the North Star to their right as they traversed the ridge. The adrenaline that had sustained them was beginning to ebb, leaving exhaustion in its wake. Jonah's grazed arm throbbed, and every muscle protested the night's exertions. Martha's house appeared as a small cabin set in a clearing, a single window illuminated despite the late hour. Alma approached directly, confident in her cousin's loyalty. When she knocked, the door opened almost immediately, revealing a woman in her 60s with Alma's same determined eyes. "Lord in heaven," Martha breathed, taking in their bedraggled appearance. "He finally found it, didn't he? Catherine's evidence." "We need your phone," Alma said without preamble. "And then you need to leave. It's not safe to be connected to us right now." Martha ushered them inside, locking the door behind them. "Phone's in the kitchen. I'll pack a bag and be gone in 10 minutes. My sister's place in Riverton is far enough away." She hesitated, then added, "Samuel Reed came by earlier, looking like he'd seen combat. Said to tell you he got the message through before they destroyed his telegraph." Relief washed over Alma's features. "Then Judge Harmon already knows. We just need to confirm our location and that we have the physical evidence." While Alma made the call, Jonah checked the windows and doors, securing the small cabin as best he could. They were momentarily safe, but that condition wouldn't last. Ryland's men would eventually expand their search to include the homes of everyone connected to Alma. "Judge Harmon is sending federal marshals," Alma reported when she hung up the phone. "They'll be here by morning. All we have to do is stay alive and keep the evidence intact until then." Martha emerged from the bedroom with a small suitcase. "I've left food in the pantry and extra ammunition in the dresser drawer. Good hunting rifle above the fireplace. Don't hesitate to use it." She hugged Alma fiercely. Catherine would be proud. 20 years is a long time to carry this burden alone. After Martha departed in her ancient pickup truck, Jonah and Alma secured the cabin, extinguishing all lights and positioning themselves with clear views of the approaches. The waiting would be the hardest part, hours of darkness during which Ryland's men might appear at any moment. "Why didn't you ever use the trust agreement before now?" Jonah asked during a lull in their vigilance. "You were legally the owner of White Pine all these years." "A piece of paper means nothing without power behind it," Alma replied, her gaze never leaving the window she monitored. "Ryland would have buried me in legal challenges, claimed forgery, used his influence to have the trust invalidated. I needed more, proof beyond doubt of his crimes. The kind of evidence that would make even his bought judges and officials abandon him to save themselves. You've been gathering that proof for 20 years, Jonah realized, collecting testimonies, documenting his operations, waiting for the right moment, and for the right ally. She glanced at him briefly. Marcus believed you would return someday. Said you were the only one who'd stood up to Ryland and paid the price for it. The only one who might be angry enough to finish what Catherine started. The night deepened around them, stars wheeling overhead as they maintained their vigil. Occasional distant engine sounds kept them alert, but no vehicles approached the isolated cabin. Perhaps Ryland's search remained focused elsewhere, or perhaps they were regrouping after losing their quarry in the mine. Dawn was still hours away when a new sound broke the silence. The distinctive thrum of helicopter rotors approaching from the east. "That's not Ryland," Jonah said, straining to see through the darkness. "No civilian has a helicopter in this county." "Federal marshals," Alma confirmed, relief evident in her voice. Judge Harmon must have expedited the response. He was Catherine's friend before he moved to the capital. He's been waiting for this evidence as long as I have. The helicopter circled once, then descended toward the clearing in front of the cabin. Its landing lights illuminated a black Bell chopper with U.S. Marshal emblazoned on the side. As the rotors slowed, three figures emerged, two in tactical gear, one in a suit despite the early hour. "That's Judge Harmon himself," Alma breathed, recognizing the older man in the suit. "He came personally." They stepped onto the porch as the federal party approached, Alma clutching Catherine's diary and the strongbox containing the most damning evidence. Judge Harmon climbed the steps with the vigor of a much younger man, his white hair whipping in the rotor wash. "Ms. Vance," he acknowledged Alma with formal respect before turning to Jonah. "Mr. Caldwell, I understand you've uncovered evidence regarding multiple homicides and systematic fraud committed by Ryland Hardwick." "Yes, Your Honor. Evidence that's been preserved for 20 years, waiting for justice." The judge's expression hardened. "Justice has been delayed far too long in this matter. I've signed warrants for Ryland Hardwick's arrest on multiple counts of murder, fraud, and corruption. Federal marshals are moving to secure his property and business records as we speak." One of the tactical officers approached, his manner professional but urgent. "Sir, we need to evacuate now. Local radio traffic indicates Hardwick's security team is mobilizing toward this location." "Then let's not keep them waiting," Judge Harmon replied, his tone suddenly cold. "I've spent 20 years watching Ryland Hardwick corrupt my jurisdiction from afar. I want to be present when he's taken into custody." As they boarded the helicopter, Jonah looked back at Martha's cabin, a humble structure that had become the final sanctuary for Catherine's evidence. In the growing light, he could see vehicles moving on the distant road. Ryland's men, arriving too late to stop justice that had been 2 decades in the making. The helicopter rose above the trees, banking toward Timber Creek as the first rays of dawn illuminated the valley. Below them, the landscape that had been Ryland Hardwick's personal fiefdom for a generation was about to witness his fall. In the distance, the bunkhouse stood solitary on its small rise, no longer a place of hidden secrets and manufactured hauntings, but the first chapter in a story of justice finally fulfilled. Whatever truth remained buried beneath its floorboards would soon stand revealed in the harsh light of day, bringing an accounting 2 decades overdue. The helicopter banked sharply as it approached Carson City, early morning sunlight glinting off buildings below. Jonah watched the landscape transform from wilderness to civilization, a stark contrast to the chaos they'd escaped hours earlier. Beside him, Alma clutched Catherine's diary and the evidence strongbox, her knuckles white with tension. Despite their escape, her vigilance remained undiminished after 20 years of living in Ryland's shadow. Federal agents had established a temporary command post at the Carson City Justice Center, its brick facade a symbol of the institutional power Ryland had manipulated for decades. As the helicopter settled onto a designated landing zone, Judge Harmon stepped forward to meet them, flanked by stern-faced marshals. His expression betrayed nothing, but the slight quickening in his step revealed his eagerness to see what they'd recovered. "You made it." Judge Harmon helped Alma from the helicopter with formal courtesy before turning to Jonah. "When we lost radio contact after Reed's telegraph was destroyed, we feared the worst. Ryland's men came close." Jonah's voice sounded distant to his own ears, the adrenaline crash leaving him hollow. "Wade Sutton led the pursuit personally. Without Martha's phone, we wouldn't be standing here. The judge nodded briskly. We've issued federal warrants for Ryland, Hardwick, and 12 associates, including Sutton. Teams are moving simultaneously to secure all Hardwick properties and prevent evidence destruction. For now, let's get you inside and properly document what you've brought us. The Justice Center's conference room had been transformed into a secure evidence processing station. Forensic technicians in white gloves stood ready as Alma surrendered Catherine's diary in the strongbox. Each item would be photographed, logged, and secured, creating an unimpeachable chain of custody that even Ryland's expensive lawyers couldn't challenge. Timber Creek Sheriff's Department has been placed under temporary federal oversight, Judge Harmon explained, as they watched the technicians work. Sheriff Delaney protested until we produced evidence of his monthly payments from Hardwick Mining Company. How deep does the corruption go? Jonah asked, accepting a cup of coffee from an assistant. We're still mapping the network, but initial investigations indicate at least 2 county judges, the tax assessor, 3 state legislators, and possibly a federal appeals court judge. The older man's face hardened. Ryland built his protection carefully over decades, layering influence across multiple jurisdictions to ensure no single investigation could reach him. A technician approached, presenting the diary in a clear evidence sleeve. Preliminary authentication complete, Your Honor. The document dates to the period claimed, and the handwriting matches known samples of Catherine Hardwick's. And the trust agreement? Alma asked, voicing the question that would determine her legal claim to the White Pine Mine. Already verified by our document experts. Judge Harmon allowed himself a small smile. Your sister's signature matches samples from her banking records and legal correspondence. The trust is valid, Ms. Vance. White Pine legally belongs to you and has since Catherine transferred 20 years ago. A weight seemed to lift from Alma's shoulders, the culmination of a 2-decade vigil finally within reach. But her relief was short-lived as a marshal burst through the doorway, his composure cracked by urgency. We have a situation at the Hardwick estate, Your Honor. Ryland wasn't there when our team arrived. His security detail claims he left for a hunting cabin last night, but we found evidence of a hasty departure within the last hour. Someone warned him we were coming. The judge's reaction was immediate. Lock down every road out of the county. Alert Border Patrol and State Police. He won't get far. He turned to Jonah and Alma. This changes nothing about the evidence, but it does complicate our timeline. Ryland on the run is Ryland desperate, and that makes him more dangerous. He'll head for the hunting lodge near Cooper Ridge, Alma said with certainty. It's remote, defensible, and has an emergency runway for his private plane. His pilot keeps it fueled and ready. Judge Harmon relayed this information to his team, setting in motion a coordinated effort to intercept Ryland before he could escape the jurisdiction. Helicopter surveillance was dispatched immediately, while ground teams mobilized toward Cooper Ridge. You both need rest and medical attention, the judge insisted, noting their exhausted state and Jonah's blood-crusted arm where the bullet had grazed him. We have secure accommodations prepared and a doctor waiting. Neither argued. The adrenaline that had sustained them through their flight had ebbed completely, leaving bone-deep fatigue in its wake. They were led to separate rooms in a secure wing of the federal building where a doctor examined Jonah's wound and prescribed antibiotics before recommending sleep. Despite physical exhaustion, Jonah's mind refused to quiet. He lay on the narrow bed staring at the ceiling, reconstructing the events of the past 48 hours. He had arrived in Timber Creek expecting a quick property inspection before selling Uncle Marcus's bunkhouse. Instead, he had stumbled into a decades-old conspiracy of murder and corruption that had claimed multiple lives and poisoned an entire community. The irony wasn't lost on him. 15 years ago, he had pursued Ryland Hardwick as a deputy marshal, only to watch his case collapse when evidence mysteriously disappeared and witnesses recanted their testimony. Now he had returned unwittingly to finish what he had started, guided by Catherine's meticulous planning and Alma's patient vigilance. Sleep claimed him eventually, dreamless and deep. When he woke, sunlight streamed through unfamiliar blinds. A clock on the wall showed 4:17 p.m. He had slept nearly 12 hours. Clean clothes had been left on a chair, and a tray of food sat on a small table near the door. As he dressed, a knock preceded a marshal's entrance. Judge Harmon requests your presence in the operations room, sir. There's been a development. The operations center hummed with activity, agents monitoring radio traffic, satellite imagery displayed on wall screens, tactical teams receiving briefings. At the center stood Judge Harmon, his attention fixed on a topographical map spread across a table. Alma was already there, looking rested but tense. "We've located Ryland," the judge announced without preamble. Satellite imagery confirmed his vehicle at the hunting lodge, but when our teams arrived, they found the plane gone and Wade Sutton dead inside the cabin, single gunshot wound to the head. Ryland killed his own security chief? Jonah couldn't mask his surprise. Appears so. Sutton knew too much, and Ryland's eliminating liabilities. The judge pointed to a blinking indicator on one of the screens. "We tracked the plane on radar until it vanished over the mountains. Either it crashed, which satellite sweeps don't indicate, or more likely, Ryland landed at another private airstrip we don't have mapped. There's an abandoned mining company airfield near the Nevada border," Alma said. Catherine mentioned it in her diary. Ryland used it for moving gold shipments that didn't appear in official manifests. This information triggered another wave of activity as search parameters were adjusted. Judge Harmon turned to Jonah and Alma with grim determination. "While the manhunt continues, we need to solidify our case. I'd like you both to review the evidence we've recovered from the Hardwick estate, particularly documents related to the murders Catherine documented. The evidence room contained dozens of boxes seized from Ryland's office, home safe, and private vault at the Hardwick Mining Company headquarters. Forensic accountants had already begun tracking the complex web of shell companies and offshore accounts Ryland had used to conceal his activities. What caught Jonah's attention was a leather-bound ledger labeled simply Resolutions. Inside, in Ryland's meticulous handwriting, were detailed accounts of problems encountered and solutions implemented, clinical descriptions of murders disguised as business decisions. Each entry corroborated Catherine's recordings, providing the prosecution with Ryland's own documentation of his crimes. "He kept records of everything," Jonah marveled, carefully turning pages protected by evidence gloves. The same pathological need for control that drove him to document his successes will now convict him. "Narcissists often preserve evidence of their crimes as trophies," observed a forensic psychologist working nearby. "They believe themselves untouchable and want a private record of their cleverness." By evening, the search for Ryland had expanded to include neighboring states. His photograph and description were distributed to law enforcement nationwide, and all his known accounts and properties were frozen. If he had escaped the immediate area, his resources for remaining at large were significantly diminished. Judge Harmon called a strategy meeting as darkness fell. "We need to consider the possibility that Ryland had emergency plans we haven't yet uncovered. Ms. Vance, you knew him better than anyone here. Where would he go if his primary escape route failed?" Alma considered the question carefully. Ryland maintained connections with former business associates in Vancouver. He attended mining conferences there regularly and often spoke of Canadian property investments. "I believe he established a backup identity there years ago, complete with documentation and financial resources separate from his known accounts." This intelligence shifted the focus northward. Border patrol stations were alerted, and Canadian authorities were contacted through diplomatic channels. Ryland's photograph was distributed to airport and border security personnel throughout the Pacific Northwest. The wait was excruciating. Hours stretched into days as the manhunt continued. Jonah and Alma remained under federal protection at the Carson City facility, assisting investigators in interpreting evidence and providing context for relationships within Timber Creek. On the fourth day, Judge Harmon entered the conference room where they were reviewing documents, his expression unusually animated. "We've got him." Canadian authorities apprehended Ryland, attempting to board a private yacht in Victoria Harbor. He was traveling under an assumed identity with forged documents, but a customs agent recognized him from the alert bulletin. The relief was palpable. Extradition proceedings would begin immediately, with Ryland held in a maximum security facility until he could be returned to face justice in the United States. "There's more," the judge continued. "The seizure of Ryland's backup escape plan yielded additional evidence, a laptop containing encrypted files our technicians just cracked. It includes a list of officials on his payroll going back 30 years, with payment amounts and specific favors purchased. The corruption network extends further than we imagined. reaching into federal agencies and possibly even a governor's office. The ramifications were staggering. What had begun as a local investigation into one man's crimes was expanding into a multi-agency corruption probe that would reshape political and legal landscapes across multiple jurisdictions. With Ryland in custody, it's safe for you to return to Timber Creek if you wish, Judge Harmon told them. Federal marshals will maintain protective details until the trial concludes, but immediate danger has passed. The town they returned to a week later bore little resemblance to the one they had fled. FBI agents and federal auditors occupied the Hardwick Mining Company offices. Sheriff Delaney had resigned and been replaced by an interim appointee from the state police. The power structure that had dominated Timber Creek for generations had collapsed virtually overnight. Jonah's first destination was the Bunkhouse property, or what remained of it. During their pursuit, Wade's men had set fire to the structure, hoping to destroy both evidence and fugitives. The wooden portions had burned completely, leaving only the stone foundation and chimney standing like ancient monuments to a vanished civilization. As he surveyed the ruins, Jonah felt no grief for the loss. The building had served its purpose as Catherine's first evidence cache. Its destruction seemed almost fitting, a cleansing fire that marked the end of secrets and the beginning of truth. Alma joined him there the following morning, arriving as sunrise painted the valley in amber light. She carried wildflowers gathered from the ridge where they had found the third evidence location. Without speaking, she placed them on a cornerstone that had survived the fire. "I've been thinking about rebuilding," she said eventually. "Not as a bunkhouse, but as something else. A community center, perhaps, or a memorial to those who died seeking justice." Jonah nodded, understanding her need to transform the space into something that served the living rather than preserving the dead. Marcus would have approved. He kept faith with Catherine all those years, but he wouldn't want this place defined by tragedy forever. In the days that followed, they witnessed the gradual awakening of a community long suppressed by Ryland's influence. People spoke more freely, stood straighter, looked each other in the eye without fear. The change was subtle but profound, a population rediscovering its voice after decades of enforced silence. Samuel Reed had survived the attack on his newspaper office and immediately began rebuilding. His first edition, after returning to operations, sold out within hours. A comprehensive account of Catherine's investigation, her murder, and the evidence that had finally brought Ryland to justice. Reed had written with journalistic precision, presenting facts rather than sensation, letting the evidence speak for itself. The Hardwick Mining Company remained operational but under federal receivership, its assets frozen pending resolution of both criminal proceedings and civil claims. Miners continued working, their jobs temporarily preserved, while ownership questions remained unresolved. 2 weeks after their return, Judge Harmon arrived in Timber Creek to personally oversee the transition of evidence to the prosecution team. He met with Jonah and Alma at the federal office established in town. Ryland has been extradited and arraigned on multiple counts of murder, racketeering, fraud, and corruption, he informed them. His attorneys have requested a change of venue, arguing he can't receive a fair trial in a jurisdiction where he's so well known. "Will that be granted?" Alma asked, concern evident in her voice. "Unlikely. The prosecution's position is that his fame resulted from his own criminal activities and influence peddling. The venue won't change, but jury selection will be handled with extreme care." The judge hesitated before continuing. "There's something else you should know. Ryland's defense team has indicated they plan to attack Catherine's credibility. They'll claim her evidence was motivated by personal vengeance during a contentious divorce, not genuine pursuit of justice." Alma's face hardened. "They can try. Catherine's recordings speak for themselves. No one fabricates evidence against a man like Ryland unless they have actually witnessed his crimes." "Agreed, Saeed. The prosecution isn't concerned about this approach, but I wanted you prepared for what might be said about Catherine during trial." He shifted topics smoothly. "There's also movement on the civil front. The White Pine Mine ownership transfer has been officially recognized. As Catherine's heir, you now control the most valuable mining operation in the county." This confirmation brought Alma not triumph, but thoughtful consideration. "I've been planning for this possibility for 20 years, she said. "The mine should continue operating. The community depends on those jobs. but with fundamental changes to how profits are distributed and workers are treated. She outlined her vision, a profit-sharing system that would reward miners for their labor, investment in safety equipment and training, establishment of a community foundation to fund education and healthcare initiatives throughout the county. Not revenge, but restoration, using Ryland's wealth to heal the community he had exploited. Implementation began almost immediately. As legal owner, Alma had authority to reshape operations even before the civil case formally concluded. Miners who had viewed the federal intervention with suspicion found themselves with improved conditions and profit-sharing arrangements that acknowledged their essential role. The foundation Alma established, named for Catherine rather than herself, extended beyond mining concerns to address broader community needs. Buildings that had housed Hardwick operations were repurposed as technical training facilities, medical clinics, and affordable housing. Wealth that had been concentrated for generations began flowing outward. Throughout these developments, Catherine's voice, captured on those microcassette recordings 20 years earlier, served as both evidence and inspiration. Her foresight in documenting not only Ryland's crimes, but also her vision for justice, had created a blueprint Alma followed faithfully. 1 month after Ryland's capture, as preparations for trial intensified, Jonah received an unexpected request. Ryland had asked to meet with him privately at the detention center where he awaited trial. The request had been vetted through Judge Harmon, who advised caution but saw no legal reason to prevent the meeting. "Why would he want to see me?" Jonah asked when the judge relayed the request. He wouldn't specify, said only that it concerned a private matter between the Caldwell and Hardwick families that predated current events. The judge's expression remained neutral. "You're under no obligation to agree." Curiosity overcame caution. Jonah consented to the meeting, understanding it would be monitored and recorded as potential evidence. Whatever Ryland wanted to discuss would provide no legal advantage, only perhaps some insight into the mind of a man who had built an empire on others' suffering. The detention center's interview room was Spartan: a table, 2 chairs, reinforced glass allowing observation from adjacent rooms. Ryland entered in standard-issue jumpsuit, the orange fabric a jarring contrast to the bespoke suits that had been his uniform throughout life. Without access to his personal barber, his silver hair had grown shaggy, and a stubble beard covered his usually clean-shaven jaw. Despite these indignities, he carried himself with the same authority he had always projected. His gaze remained steady, his posture erect, his hands folded calmly on the table, as though conducting a routine business meeting rather than awaiting trial for multiple homicides. "Mr. Caldwell, thank you for coming." His voice betrayed no desperation, no fear, only the practiced courtesy of a man accustomed to controlling conversations. "I wanted to discuss something that Catherine took to her grave, something that explains more than you realize about our family's history." "I'm not interested in manipulations, Ryland." Jonah remained standing, unwilling to settle into the psychological equality sitting might imply. "Whatever game you're playing, this is no game. It concerns your Uncle Marcus and my wife. Their relationship was more complicated than even Alma knows." The statement hung in the air, a deliberate provocation designed to spark curiosity. Jonah recognized the tactic but couldn't entirely resist its pull. Marcus and Catherine were childhood friends. She trusted him when she discovered your crimes. They were more than friends. A thin smile crossed Ryland's face, satisfaction at having secured Jonah's engagement. "They were lovers, briefly, before she married me. And afterward as well, I suspect, though I could never prove it. That's why he helped her so eagerly, why he preserved her evidence so faithfully. Not justice, love. If this is an attempt to undermine Catherine's credibility, it's an explanation of motivation. Everyone in this Valley drama has operated from personal interest disguised as principle. Catherine wasn't documenting my business practices out of abstract devotion to justice. She was building leverage for a divorce that would secure her financial independence. Marcus wasn't protecting evidence for future prosecution. He was preserving a connection to a woman he couldn't openly claim. Ryland leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping as though sharing confidential insights. "Even you, Mr. Caldwell. Your renewed interest in ancient history isn't about truth or justice. It's about redeeming your failed career, reclaiming professional standing you lost when your previous investigation collapsed." "And Alma," Jonah kept his tone neutral despite the anger building beneath. What personal interest drives her 20-year vigil? Money. The White Pine Mine alone is worth over $30 million. Catherine's trust agreement gave her control of my most valuable asset. Every action since, the evidence preservation, the careful documentation, the patient waiting has been building toward that transfer of wealth. The marshals observing through the glass shifted position, sensing the escalating tension. Jonah recognized Ryland's strategy, sowing doubt about everyone's motives, reframing principled actions as self-interest, muddying moral clarity with cynical interpretation. "You mistake your own nature for universal condition," Jonah replied, recognizing the futility of argument, but unwilling to leave the assertions unchallenged. Not everyone measures life in profit and advantage, a comforting fiction for those who fail to secure either. Ryland's expression remained unchanged, his confidence flew despite his circumstances. "I built something in this valley, created prosperity where there was poverty, opportunity where there was stagnation. History will judge me more kindly than this moment's moral panic suggests. History will record what Catherine documented, a criminal who murdered those who stood in his way, who corrupted public officials, who built wealth on theft and intimidation. History is written by those who control the narrative." Ryland's certainty never wavered. "Today, that may be you and Alma. Tomorrow? Who knows? Power shifts. Fortunes change. The White Pine vein will be exhausted within a decade. What remains of my legacy, then, will depend on who controls its telling." The conversation had revealed Ryland's purpose, not information sharing, but narrative seeding. Even facing overwhelming evidence, he was positioning for future redemption, laying groundwork for historical revision that might rehabilitate his reputation after legal consequences had been served. "Is that all you wanted to discuss? Posthumous reputation management?" "I wanted you to understand that this valley's history doesn't divide neatly into heroes and villains. We've all acted from self-interest clothed in nobler language. The difference is that I admit it." Ryland sat back, his purpose apparently accomplished. "When you rebuild on the Bunkhouse property, as I assume you will, remember that the foundation was laid by complicated people with mixed motives, not by saints." The meeting concluded without further revelation. Jonah departed with the impression that Ryland, despite his circumstances, remained dangerously effective at psychological manipulation. His insinuations about Marcus and Catherine, about Alma's motives, about Jonah's own purposes, all calculated to introduce doubt where certainty had previously existed. Judge Harmon was waiting outside the interview room, his expression concerned. "Did he offer anything of substance?" "Just poison," Jonah replied, trying to reframe everyone's motives as self-interest equivalent to his own. Classic narcissistic defense. If everyone is equally compromised, no one can claim moral superiority. A strategy his attorneys will likely pursue at trial. Paint everyone as acting from personal agenda rather than principle. The judge sighed heavily. It won't work against Catherine's recordings. Her voice speaks with a moral clarity that transcends retrospective smearing. As preparations for trial continued, an unexpected discovery shifted the case in a direction no one had anticipated. Forensic teams examining the fourth evidence location, the oak tree where Catherine had hidden her recordings, found additional material buried deeper than the initial container. "She created a decoy system," the lead technician explained, presenting a waterproof case containing a final microcassette. "The first cache was meant to be found if someone discovered the location. This was buried 2 feet deeper, beneath a layer of stones that appeared to be natural bedrock. Catherine's final recording, made the night before her death, revealed dimensions of foresight no one had attributed to her. She had anticipated not only her murder, but also the possibility that Ryland might eventually face justice, an attempt to minimize his crimes through legal maneuvering. If you're hearing this, her voice stated with eerie calm, Ryland has been caught and is attempting to negotiate reduced charges by offering testimony against his corruption network. Don't let him succeed. Attached to this tape is a key to a safe deposit box at First National Bank in Carson City, registered under my maiden name. Inside, you'll find documented evidence of every murder Ryland committed personally, not just the 3 I've already recorded, but 4 others I've tracked through careful investigation. She had been more thorough than anyone realized, more strategic in her evidence collection. Not content to document financial crimes in the murders she personally witnessed, Catherine had systematically investigated suspicious deaths throughout Ryland's rise to power, building a case that extended back to his earliest days in the mining business. The safe deposit box contained photographs, witness statements collected in secret, forensic evidence preserved from crime scenes, material gathered through means Catherine explained in accompanying notes. She had cultivated sources within the sheriff's department, the coroner's office, even Ryland's security detail, creating a shadow investigation that paralleled her financial documentation. Most damning was a journal in Ryland's handwriting, stolen from his private study, detailing his first solution, the murder of his business partner in 1978, that had given him sole control of what would become Hardwick Mining Company. This foundational crime had established the pattern he would follow for decades: eliminate obstacles through violence while maintaining a public persona of respectability. When presented with this final evidence cache, the U.S. Attorney's consideration of a plea deal evaporated completely. The case would proceed to trial with full charges intact, including multiple counts of first-degree murder, with special circumstances that could result in capital punishment. Ryland's defense team, confronted with this overwhelming new evidence, shifted strategy dramatically. No longer attacking Catherine's credibility, they now claimed Ryland had suffered from undiagnosed mental illness that impaired his ability to distinguish right from wrong. A desperation move that contradicted decades of his meticulously calculated business and criminal activities. 6 weeks after returning to Timber Creek, Jonah found himself standing once more on the foundation of the burned bunkhouse, contemplating next steps. His contracting business in the city had been foreclosed during his absence, closing that chapter of his life definitively. The property before him offered possibilities limited only by imagination and resources. Alma joined him, arriving without ceremony as had become their habit. "I've been speaking with Samuel Reed about establishing a historical archive," she said without preamble. "A place to preserve Catherine's evidence and documentation of Ryland's crimes once the trial concludes. Educational rather than sensational. A resource for understanding how corruption can infiltrate communities." The idea resonated with Jonah. Not a memorial focused on past tragedy, but a forward-looking institution that might prevent similar abuses in the future. This would be an ideal location. Visible reminder without being morbid, connected directly to Catherine's first evidence cache. Together they walked the perimeter of the foundation, discussing possibilities. A simple structure incorporating the original stone elements. Space for documents, photographs, recordings. Meeting rooms where students and researchers could study the material. A living institution rather than a static monument. As they talked, Jonah realized he was envisioning a future in Timber Creek, something he hadn't considered when he first arrived to claim his inheritance. The community was transforming daily as Ryland's influence receded, revealing possibilities that had been suppressed for generations. "Will you stay?" Alma asked, perceiving his thoughts with the directness that characterized her approach to everything. "After the trial, I mean." The question deserved honest consideration. Jonah had no ties binding him elsewhere, no career to return to, no relationships that would suffer from his absence. What he did have was a connection to this place, not just through Uncle Marcus, but through his own role in uncovering the truth that had set it free. "I think I might," he answered finally. "There's work to be done here. Important work." Alma nodded, satisfied. Catherine would be pleased. She always believed this valley deserved better than what it got from Ryland. Now we have a chance to prove her right. In the distance, mining operations continued at White Pine, but under fundamentally different principles. Workers who had been exploited now shared in the wealth they helped create. Community members who had lived in fear now spoke openly about their experiences under Ryland's regime. The framework of oppression that had defined the region for decades was being dismantled, piece by piece. 2 months after Ryland's capture, jury selection began for what would become one of the most closely watched trials in the state's history. The proceedings would continue for many months. Complex financial evidence intertwined with brutal murders, a criminal enterprise spanning decades laid bare in a courtroom. The outcome seemed increasingly certain as Catherine's carefully preserved evidence was presented to the jury. Her voice, reaching across 20 years from those microcassette recordings provided testimony more powerful than any living witness could offer. She had documented everything, anticipated every defense, created a case so thorough it seemed impossible to counter. Jonah would testify about finding the first evidence cache. Alma would explain her two-decade vigil protecting her sister's legacy. Judge Harmon would authenticate the documents Catherine had entrusted to him. But the star witness remained Catherine herself, speaking truth to power from beyond death, ensuring that justice, though delayed, would not be denied. The bunkhouse property, once feared as haunted, now stood as the physical manifestation of that determined pursuit of truth. Its burned timbers and exposed foundation revealed what had been hidden, just as Catherine's evidence had exposed Ryland's crimes. In both cases, what remained after destruction was more valuable than what had been concealed before. As autumn painted the valley in gold and crimson, Catherine's final diary entry acquired new significance. Truth buried is not truth eliminated. It remains, a seed waiting for the right season to emerge and grow toward light. The season had arrived, the buried seeds had sprouted, and the light of truth was transforming a community long kept in darkness.